Shalom. I appreciate everybody that stops by, checks out this channel. This channel specifically is for advancement of knowledge and information. My goal is simply to touch on a number of order of topics, from religious studies to things like science to even secret societies. This program is simply a better way to focus on who we are, how we learn this information, and just who we're fighting against. One of the things I want to touch on is Jewish identity. What constitutes the people of Israel genetically? Another thing I want to touch on is secret societies, Freemasonry, the Holy Bible, and the church. What is the relationship? What is the agenda? How does those two mesh and come together? I also want to talk about symbols. How are symbols important? How to decipher symbols? What do these symbols mean? Whether it's mythology or whether it's in the scrolls. I want to break that down. Symbols are very important, so we have to understand how we can understand it, decipher it, interpret it. Symbols is very important. And as you can see in this photo, that's ORU, Oral Roberts University. That's the campus. And right in front of you is a triangle with an eye in the middle. That's called the Eye of Providence. What is it doing on that campus? So we're going to get into situations like that and discuss that a little bit later in this video. What I want to talk on and teach on is that a lot of stuff in the scrolls, in the Hebraic scrolls, even in mythology, deals with the human brain. There's a symbol called the menorah, and the menorah is the lampstand of the Jewish people. That deals specifically with the human brain, neurology, and the mind. As I go on to read Proverbs 20:27, we read here in Proverbs 20:27, the human spirit is the lamp of the Lord that sheds light on one's innermost being. It says the spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord, searching out his innermost part, or his innermost being. So the menorah represents, according to the Torah, the menorah is the mind of man, or the brain of man. It's the spirit of man. And if you're looking at the Hebraic word ruach, it means mind, breath, spirit. So we're talking about the brain, the central nervous system. So the menorah is very, very, very significant and connected to the central nervous system, the human brain. So the menorah specifically deals with the human mind or the human brain. There's 7 branches of the candlestick. There's also 7 parts of the human brain. Now there's actually 3 parts, which is the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. But those 3 parts are divided into 2 hemispheres. So the brain, you have the left side and the right side of the brain. And you have those parts that are divided from 3 into 6. And then there's a middle part called the corpus callosum that holds it together, just like the middle of the lampstand, or the candlestick in the middle of the menorah, that's holding the 3 on the left and the 3 on the right. So that has to do specifically with the human brain. Even if you look at the ancient Egyptian pharaohs and their motifs and the way they adorn their headdress, if you look closely, there's a sun disk that's surrounded what looks like by cow horns, or by 2 hands, or by 2 plumes. And what that represents is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is shaped just like that sun disk inside of those 2 horns, or those 2 hands, or those 2 feathered plumes. And it represents, again, something inside of the human brain. It represents the mind. So these symbols are not just symbols that the Egyptians or people in ancient civilizations was throwing together. They actually mean something that deals with inside of the human brain. Now that we got that out of the way, let's take a look at something like the Garden of Eden. A lot of people think that the scriptures is talking about an actual garden, which it might be, but there's something even more deeper than that. And a lot of people mistaking the fruit and the tree and the snake for an apple or something that's just almost out of folklore. That just doesn't really make too much sense. But when you look a little bit deeper and a little closer, and you study the actual words in Hebrew, you'll find out that the writers were talking about something way more different and more significant. For instance, the word garden, or gan, in Hebrew means an enclosure, an fenced enclosure. An enclosure is an area that is sealed off with an artificial or natural barrier. It is also the state of being enclosed, especially in a religious community. So we're talking about a religious setting or a religious community, or something that is keeping you enclosed for a religious purpose. In other words, we're talking about a temple. So specifically, what the Torah or the writers of the Torah was talking about is a temple. So let's go a little further and deeper and see what else they're talking about. The serpent itself, the word nachash, which means serpent, but it also has another meaning. The same word nachash for serpent also means to practice divination, to observe signs. So what we're talking about is divination, or someone who practices divination or sorcery or necromancy or shamanism. So it has another meaning. It's not just a snake, but a teaching or a practice of a specific teaching. So they're not just talking or reacting or learning from this snake. They're learning from a shaman, or they're learning from a necromancer. That's what it's talking about. So there's deeper meaning to what we're learning and how we should learn this. The word tree, etz, also means carpenters, right down there by that definition right there next to framework in the Strong's Dictionary of Hebraic Dictionary. We find the word carpenters. A carpenter is somebody that teaches a certain craft or somebody that's skilled in a certain trade. So again, we're talking about teaching or a teacher. There's another Hebraic word for tree and teaching, which means mareh. So again, the scriptures is telling us that there's something being taught to Adam and to Hava, which is Adam and Eve. So there's something they're learning. And there's a teaching or a teacher of necromancy or shamanism or divination that they learned that changed their nature or their state and their way of mind. There's another picture that I saw of a brain cell. It's called pyramidal neuron, and it's shaped like a pyramid, and it has a nucleus in the middle. um it looks like an eye within a pyramid, so it has that eye of providence look that you see on the back of the dollar bill, that you see in a lot of Masonic and Freemasonry imagery. So I found that interesting. Another thing that I found interesting was ventricles of the brain. Now, in this picture and in this image, we have the interior and inferior horns. They're shaped like ram's horns, and we understand that the ram or the ayil in the Bible, this image of the inferior and the third ventricle and the interior horn, the inferior horn, the interior horn, and third ventricle looks a lot like an actual ram, which of course I put in the description, the ram of Elohim or the ram of God, but it looks just like it has that ram shape. So inside of our brain, inside of the human brain, it's this shape through our, our third ventricle and our inferior and interior horns, this ram-like structure right inside of the human mind, inside of the human brain. That's very interesting. Another thing that I wanted to touch on was the 12 gates of Jerusalem that you can read in Nehemiah chapter 3 and even in chapter 12. And so this is important because there are 12 gates to the city. And so when we're talking about the structure and the construction of the Jewish temple, you have to look back at the brain. So when you're looking back at the brain again, you see that there's 12 cranial nerves. There's 12 cranial nerves. You have the optic nerve and the facial and the vagus nerve and the accessory nerve, different nerves, but it's 12 that lead into the brain. So again, you have that imagery and you have this connection between what the scripture is talking about and how it relates to the human mind. Also, there's 4 layers to the tabernacle. So when looking at the tabernacle and how the tabernacle was constructed with 4 layers, and there was 4 layers that covered the tabernacle, that kind of made me look at the covering of man. So I went back to looking at the brain again, the head again. So what I found was, and I'm going to read this part right here, it says the brain is housed inside a bony covering called the cranium. The cranium protects the brain from injury, along with the bones that protect the face are called the skull. Between the skull and the brain is the meninges, which consists of 3 layers of tissue that cover and protect the brain and spinal cord. Those 3 layers are the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, the arachnoid and the pia matter. So that's 3 connected to the skull of the cranium. So that's 4 layers that protects the head, that consists of our head. So again, that's connected, that's specific to how the tabernacle was built. Another piece of imagery that's pretty important is the spinal cord itself. and there's 33 vertebrae, like 33 degrees of Freemasonry. But this is very important because if you look closely, it looks like a snake or a cobra. You can see that at the base of the spine, that looks like a cobra head. So this is what's called the Kundalini, and things like Hinduism and other esoteric teachings. But when you're talking about Hebraic teachings and writings, they're talking about the Manara, which is the central nervous system, the brain. Going forward, next, we look at the Ark of the Covenant, and we see that the Ark of the Covenant itself is this chest box, and it's enshrined by these winged cherubim, or these winged beings. And this looks awfully a lot like, I hope I'm pronouncing this word right, the sphenoid, which is where the pituitary gland, and that gland is very important, just like I was talking about in Egyptian motifs and statues. That gland is very important, but the sphenoid, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, is a winged box that houses in the center the pituitary gland. So again, you see this imagery. Even you can even see this imagery, this chest box, winged chest box imagery, even in ancient Egypt, is not just local to Israel. So there's other imagery. There's another symbol concerning the Egyptian goddess Hathor, and if you look closely above her head, you'll see that there's a six. Or maybe that's, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a 6-pointed star, but that's not a star. That's a leaf. It's a marijuana leaf, actually. It's a sativa. And so that represents that her force or her power, her influence is within the marijuana leaf. So again, it's talking about chemicals or chemistry. It deals with the mind again. So these symbols are very deep. We have to understand what we're looking at and how to interpret these symbols of ancient civilizations. Even if you look closely at this pharaoh specifically and the upper crown, I believe that's again, look closely at this pharaoh in particular and look at the crown of Egypt on his head. That crown looks very similar to a psilocybin, which is a mushroom, a hallucinogenic mushroom. In fact, most of the structures in ancient Egypt, a lot of the pillars have a mushroom structure, a lot of them. You can just see through these pictures that they resemble the structure and the anatomy of a mushroom, because mushrooms actually have hallucinogenic effects. So again, these are substances that deal with the mind. These are structures you see in Egyptian civilization that deal with chemicals and properties that deal with the human brain. There is the Eye of Horus, and you can see the thalamus right in the middle, the corpus callosum, the midbrain, the cerebellum. Next I want to talk about, and I want to touch on, is the Agduat of Hermopolis. The Agduat was a system of 8 deities, 4 gods and their consorts, and we're going to talk about one of their creation myths, actually a couple of their creation myths. So let me see if I can find that down here. One of their creation myths held that the world was created, or born from a cosmic egg, created by the gods of the Agduat. I'm going to go down here a little bit to kind of put some emphasis on it. When rehatched from the egg, so the sun god actually hatched from the egg. He created the world and everything in it. So going back to this image of the thalamus, which looks exactly like an egg. It looks exactly like an egg. There's another creation myth that deals with the lotus. It says the third myth states that the lotus flower emerged from the waters of the sea and of the sea of the 2 knives. The petals opened to reveal Re, who then created the world. So again, we're dealing with the lotus flower, but if you look closely at the lotus flower, it looks similar to the thalamus again. You see that shape specifically looks like the lotus flower. So when you're looking at that creation myth, both the thalamus itself has both the shape of an egg and it also has the shape of that Pacific lotus flower. Moving on from that, I want to get into the genetic disposition or the genetic DNA of the Egyptian people themselves.